It was a quiet afternoon in Washington, D.C. The air around the White House was calm, filled with the usual rhythm of tourists taking pictures and security officers standing watch. Among the people walking past the gates was a tall black man dressed neatly in a dark blue suit. His name was Elijah Grant. He stood near a black car parked by the curb, holding his phone and speaking in a calm and professional tone. His voice was low, polite, and focused. But one police officer nearby noticed him and grew suspicious for no reason at all. Officer Bradley, a local patrol cop known for his sharp attitude, narrowed his eyes as he looked at Elijah. In his mind, he thought the man was acting strange, even though Elijah was simply checking his phone for a message. Bradley decided to walk over, his boots hitting the pavement with force as he adjusted his belt and touched the edge of his badge. He didn't say hello or ask a question kindly. He just walked right up to Elijah and said, "What are you doing here?" Elijah looked up, surprised by the tone. "I have a meeting inside," he replied quietly. His voice was calm and respectful. "I'm waiting for my security escort." He lifted his ID badge slightly from his coat pocket, but before he could finish, Bradley stepped closer. "Don't try to be clever with me," Bradley said, his voice full of pride. "This is a restricted area. You people can't just stand around here." His tone turned sharp, and a few tourists standing nearby began to notice. Elijah blinked slowly, clearly confused but still patient. "I assure you, officer, I'm authorized to be here," Elijah said softly. "I work with," Bradley interrupted him. "Show me your ID right now," he shouted, his hand hovering near his belt as if expecting trouble. Elijah gently reached for his wallet, moving carefully, but Bradley suddenly grabbed his wrist and yanked him forward, forcing him against the hood of the patrol car. The sound of metal and surprise echoed across the street. A few tourists gasped. One of them pulled out a phone and started recording. Elijah didn't resist. He stayed still, his cheek pressed against the cool surface of the car. His voice was calm even in the moment of embarrassment. "Officer," he said quietly, "please listen to me. You're making a mistake." Bradley ignored him. He pulled out his handcuffs and snapped them around Elijah's wrists with unnecessary force. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" he said loudly, trying to sound tough in front of the growing crowd. "I'm just telling you," Elijah replied gently, "that you're not seeing the full picture." Bradley rolled his eyes. "I don't need lectures from you," he muttered. He started to search Elijah's pockets roughly, pulling out the phone and wallet. Tourists nearby began whispering, some of them trying to get closer to see what was happening. A child asked his mother what the officer was doing, and she pulled him away quietly. Elijah turned his head slightly, his expression full of calm sadness. He didn't fight back or raise his voice. "Please," he said once more. "You'll regret this later." Bradley didn't care. "Yeah, sure," he said sarcastically. "Everyone says that. You all think you're special." By now, a few more officers had arrived, wondering what was going on. One of them, Officer Davis, recognized Elijah but didn't speak up right away. He froze, watching the scene unfold with unease. "Bradley," he said carefully, "you sure you want to do this?" Bradley glared at him. He was acting suspicious near the gate. "I'm taking him in for questioning." Davis hesitated but didn't argue further. Elijah was led toward the patrol car, still handcuffed, still calm. "At least let me explain who I am," he said softly. Bradley didn't answer. He opened the car door and pushed him inside. A woman from the crowd shouted, "That man didn't do anything." But Bradley ignored her too. The tourists were now holding up their phones, recording everything from different angles. Elijah sat silently in the back seat, his eyes distant, his thoughts steady. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. The drive to the station felt long and tense. Bradley kept glancing at the mirror, expecting Elijah to say something, but the man stayed quiet, looking out the window. For a moment, Bradley almost felt unsure of himself, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. "You think silence makes you look innocent?" he said. Elijah replied quietly, "It makes me patient." The words hit Bradley strangely, but he shook it off. When they arrived at the station, he led Elijah inside and handed his wallet and phone to the desk officer. "Suspicious individual near the White House gates," he announced proudly. The desk officer raised an eyebrow and opened the wallet. Inside was a badge, black and gold, with an eagle emblem and fine lettering that read, "United States Secret Service." The desk officer's eyes widened slightly, but before he could say anything, Bradley spoke again. "He was resisting instructions, so I had to use force." Elijah didn't correct him. He just stood quietly as the room began to grow uneasy. In that moment, another officer entered the lobby and froze when he saw Elijah. "Wait," he said slowly, "is that Elijah Grant?" Bradley frowned. "You know him?" The other officer swallowed hard. "That's not just anyone. That's the new director of the Secret Service." The room went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Bradley's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Elijah, then back at the others. The realization hit him like ice water. Elijah stood there calmly, his hand still cuffed, his voice quiet. "I tried to tell you," he said gently. The station captain came rushing out of his office after hearing the commotion. The moment he saw Elijah, he went pale. "Oh no," he said under his breath. He turned to Bradley. "Uncuff him right now." Bradley's hands shook as he removed the cuffs. "Sir, I didn't know." The captain cut him off. "That's the problem. You didn't care to know." Elijah rubbed his wrists lightly, looking down for a moment before meeting the captain's eyes. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'm not hurt, but I am disappointed." The captain nodded, unable to speak. Bradley stood frozen, his pride now replaced by quiet shame. Elijah picked up his wallet and phone, then looked at Bradley one last time. "You saw me as a problem when I was just a person," he said calmly. "That's where everything went wrong." Without another word, he turned and walked out, his steps slow and steady. The room stayed silent until the sound of the door closing faded away. Everyone knew that the moment they had just witnessed would not stay hidden for long. Outside, a few of the same tourists were still waiting near the station, holding their phones and showing the video to one another. The story was already spreading online, people talking about the calm man arrested near the White House. The one who never raised his voice, never fought back. Elijah walked past them quietly and entered a black SUV waiting nearby. The driver, a Secret Service agent, opened the door and said softly, "Sir, are you all right?" Elijah nodded, looking out at the city. "I'm fine," he said, "but I think a lot of others are not." As the car pulled away, the officer who had treated him unfairly stood inside the station, his heart heavy with realization. He didn't know it yet, but that one rash moment outside the White House would change his life forever. And for Elijah Grant, it wasn't the pain that stayed with him. It was the reminder of how easily respect can be replaced by assumption, and how calm dignity can still be the strongest answer in the face of ignorance. The police car drove through the busy streets of Washington, D.C., its lights flashing though there was no real emergency. Inside the car, Officer Bradley sat straight, trying to look proud of what he thought was a good arrest. Elijah sat quietly in the back seat, his hands resting on his lap. His face showed no anger, no fear, just calm patience. The sound of the siren mixed with the noise of city traffic, and for a moment, Bradley glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You got anything to say for yourself?" Bradley asked, his voice half curious and half proud. Elijah looked out the window. "No, officer," he said quietly. "Not yet." Bradley smirked. That's what I thought. You'll talk when we get to the station. What Bradley didn't realize was that everything had already begun to unfold outside his control. Several tourists had recorded the scene on their phones. Within minutes, the videos were being uploaded online. A journalist named Clara Morris, who had been covering an event nearby, recognized Elijah and immediately knew something was wrong. She started posting updates on social media, explaining what she had witnessed. Her first post read, "A man matching the new Secret Service. Director's description just got handcuffed by a DC officer outside the White House. What's happening?" The post spread quickly. Reporters began calling their sources. Within an hour, several government departments were aware that something serious had occurred. Meanwhile, inside the car, Elijah's phone buzzed repeatedly in the officer's pocket, but Bradley ignored it. When they arrived at the police station, Bradley led Elijah inside proudly, calling out to the desk officer. "Brought in a suspicious individual," he said. "Found him hanging around near the White House gates." The desk officer raised an eyebrow. "Near the White House?" "Yeah," Bradley said confidently. He was acting strange. Probably planning something. Elijah said nothing. He was led to a bench in the waiting area. He sat down quietly, his eyes fixed on the wall in front of him. One of the other officers, a young man named Officer Davis, came over and leaned close to Bradley. "You sure about this?" he asked in a low voice. Bradley shrugged. Man looked out of place. "Better safe than sorry." Davis hesitated. "He doesn't look like some random guy. Did you check his ID?" Bradley frowned. "Not yet. I was going to after booking." Davis sighed. Something about the situation felt wrong. He turned to Elijah, who was still calm and quiet. "Sir," he said softly, "may I have your name, please?" Elijah looked up and answered politely, "Elijah Grant." The moment Davis heard the name, his heart skipped. It sounded familiar. He quickly walked back to his desk, opened his computer, and searched the name in the department database. When the result appeared, his face turned pale. It showed a high-level federal ID linked to the U.S. Secret Service. He whispered to himself, "Oh no." At that same moment, the station captain, a serious-looking man in his 50s named Captain Howard, came out of his office holding a phone to his ear. His expression was tight and worried. He had just received a direct call from a White House security liaison asking if a man named Elijah Grant had been brought into custody. The captain looked across the lobby and froze when he saw him sitting there, in cuffs. He ended the call quickly and rushed over. "Get those handcuffs off him right now," he shouted. The entire station turned silent. Bradley blinked, confused. "Sir, do it now," the captain barked. Bradley fumbled for his keys and unlocked the cuffs, his hand shaking slightly. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. Captain Howard took a deep breath. "That man is not a suspect," he said slowly. "He's the director of the United States Secret Service." The words hit the room like thunder. Every officer froze. Bradley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Elijah, then back at his captain, unable to believe what he had just heard. Elijah stood slowly, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been. "I tried to tell you, officer," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry. It was steady, almost gentle, but the disappointment behind it was heavy. The captain's face was red with shock and embarrassment. "Mr. Grant, please accept our apologies," he said quickly. "This should never have happened." Elijah nodded slightly. "I understand, Captain," he said. "But this isn't just about me." Everyone in the room could feel the weight of those words. Bradley wanted to speak, to explain himself, but nothing he could say would sound right. He had judged Elijah not by his actions, but by what he looked like, and now everyone in the room knew it. The captain led Elijah into his office to speak privately. "Sir, we are deeply sorry," he said again. "I'll personally handle this matter. The officer involved will face a full review." Elijah looked out the window before answering. "This is not the first time something like this has happened, Captain," he said calmly. "But maybe it should be the last." The captain nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. Outside the office, the other officers stood quietly. Bradley sat on a bench, staring down at his hands. His pride was gone. His heart pounded with regret. He had thought he was protecting the city, but in truth, he had only embarrassed himself. His department and the badge he wore as Elijah prepared to leave. A few agents from the Secret Service arrived at the station. The agents nodded respectfully to him and guided him out. Cameras from local news outlets had already gathered outside. Reporters shouted questions as Elijah stepped into the car, but he didn't answer. He simply gave a small nod to one of his agents and closed the door. Bradley stood by the window, watching the car drive away. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not because someone had yelled at him, but because of the quiet dignity with which Elijah had carried himself. The man he had handcuffed hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't threatened, argued, or insulted anyone. He had shown more control in those few hours than Bradley had in his entire career. At that same time, social media exploded with the story. The videos of the arrest were everywhere on news channels, websites, and feeds across the country. People were shocked. Many couldn't believe that a respected federal officer had been treated that way outside the nation's most secure building. By the evening, the White House press office released a short statement confirming that Director Elijah Grant was safe and unharmed, and that an unfortunate misunderstanding had occurred. But the public knew it was more than that. It wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a mirror showing how easily someone could be misjudged because of appearance. That night, in his apartment, Bradley sat in silence watching the news. Every channel showed the same footage. The scene outside the White House, his own face on camera, and Elijah's calm expression during the arrest. His wife sat beside him, speechless. "Brad," she said softly, "you didn't know who he was?" He shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "but that shouldn't matter." The words hung in the air. For the first time, he realized what Elijah had meant when he said, "You're not seeing the full picture." Meanwhile, Elijah sat at home too, quietly looking through the messages on his phone. Many were from friends, colleagues, and even high-ranking officials offering their support. But Elijah didn't feel proud or angry, he just felt tired. He knew the problem wasn't about one man. It was about something larger, something that needed to change. He looked out the window at the White House, glowing softly in the distance, and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is how change begins. Not with shouting, but with truth." And as the night went on, the city of Washington didn't sleep easily. The story of what had happened that afternoon spread far beyond the capital. Across the country, people talked about it, argued about it, and learned from it. And for both Elijah and Bradley, that day would never be forgotten. It would mark the beginning of something bigger, a story that would remind everyone that respect should never depend on who someone appears to be, but on the humanity that lives within them. The next morning, the air inside the D.C. police station felt heavy. No one spoke loudly, and every officer who walked through the door glanced nervously at each other. The news of what had happened with Elijah Grant had spread everywhere. Reporters waited outside, cameras ready. Every TV in the city was showing the video of Officer Bradley arresting the man who turned out to be the Secret Service director. The video had millions of views already. Inside, Bradley sat at his desk, his hands shaking slightly. He hadn't slept all night. His mind kept replaying the scene, the moment he pulled Elijah's wrist, the look in his eyes when he said, "You're making a mistake." He wished he could go back and listen. But now it was too late. The station captain, Captain Howard, called him into the office. "Sit down, Bradley," he said quietly. The captain's face was tired. "You know what this is about?" Bradley nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Howard leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "The footage is everywhere. The department is under a lot of pressure. The mayor called me this morning, and the chief of police will be here soon. They're not happy." Bradley swallowed hard. "I didn't mean any harm, sir. I was just doing my job." Howard sighed. "Your job is to protect people, not to assume they're criminals. You didn't ask questions. You didn't check his ID. You went straight to force." Bradley stared down at the floor. "I know, sir. I made a mistake." Howard looked at him carefully. "Do you understand what kind of man you laid your hands on? That's the director of the Secret Service. He protects the president. And you treated him like a suspect." Bradley nodded again, but words failed him. Just then, the door opened, and a woman in a dark suit entered. She carried a folder and introduced herself. "I'm Agent Reynolds, internal investigator from the Department of Justice." Her tone was professional, firm, and calm. "Officer Bradley, I'll be handling your review." Bradley stood awkwardly and shook her hand. She didn't smile. "I've watched the video," she said simply. "I'd like to hear your version." He took a deep breath. "I saw a man standing near the White House gates," he began. "He looked out of place. He wasn't wearing a visitor badge, and he seemed to be on the phone, looking around. I thought he might be scouting the area." Agent Reynolds tilted her head slightly. "Did you ask him any questions before you touched him?" Bradley hesitated. "Not really. I told him to show me ID. He hesitated, and I thought he might reach for something." She nodded slowly, writing something down. "So you didn't check his credentials, and you didn't confirm his purpose before deciding to arrest him?" Bradley lowered his eyes. "No, ma'am." The room was silent for a moment. Even Captain Howard looked down, disappointed. Reynolds closed her notebook. "That will be all for now." She stood up and walked to the door, then stopped for a moment. "You know," she said without turning around, "he could have ruined your career right there. But he didn't. He just walked away." Bradley didn't answer. He just sat there, hearing her words echo in his head. Thought later that day, an unexpected message came to the station. It was from the office of the Secret Service. They wanted to schedule a formal apology meeting with Elijah Grant present. The chief of police, Captain Howard, and Officer Bradley were to attend. Bradley's stomach tightened. The thought of facing Elijah again filled him with shame, but he knew he had to. The meeting was held at a private conference room inside the Secret Service headquarters. Cameras were not allowed. When Bradley entered the room, he saw Elijah sitting at the far end of the table, dressed neatly in another dark suit. He stood when they arrived, calm as ever, and greeted everyone politely. "Mr. Grant," the chief said nervously, "we deeply regret what happened. The department is taking full responsibility." Elijah nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," he said. "I didn't ask for this meeting because I wanted punishment. I asked because I wanted understanding." He turned his eyes toward Bradley, who couldn't bring himself to look up. "Officer Bradley," Elijah began softly, "I know what you saw that day. You saw a man who didn't look like he belonged. And instead of asking who I was, you decided who I was." Bradley swallowed hard. "Sir, I was wrong," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have acted the way I did." Elijah's voice was calm but firm. "I've worked in protection for many years. I've seen danger up close. I've stood between the president and threats. But yesterday, I wasn't facing danger. I was facing judgment." The words hung heavy in the air. "I don't hate you," Elijah continued, his tone steady. "But I do hope you think about what you did. Because one day, You might meet another man standing quietly somewhere, and he might not be wearing a suit. He might be a teacher, a father, or a student. And your choice in that moment will decide what kind of officer you truly are. Bradley nodded slowly, his eyes moist. I understand, sir. I'll never forget it. The chief cleared his throat. Mr. Grant, thank you for your grace in this situation. We're grateful you chose to handle it privately. Elijah smiled faintly. The lesson isn't just for one man, he said. It's for everyone watching. When the meeting ended, Bradley walked out of the building with a strange feeling in his chest. Shame. Yes, but also respect. He realized that the man he had treated unfairly had shown him more dignity than he deserved. Meanwhile, news stations outside waited for a statement. When Elijah stepped outside, a reporter called out, Mr. Grant, will the officer be fired? Elijah paused. His calm eyes looked toward the crowd. That's not for me to decide, he said softly. But I believe in justice that teaches, not just punishes. The crowd went quiet as he walked toward his car. Later that evening, Elijah sat in his office at the White House, reading through reports. His assistant entered the room, holding a stack of letters from citizens across the country. You've received hundreds of messages, she said gently. People are inspired by how you handled it. Elijah smiled faintly. Good, he said. That means something good came out of it. He picked up one of the letters. It was from a young boy who wrote, My dad showed me the video. He said you were strong because you stayed calm. I want to be like that when I grow up. Elijah folded the letter and set it aside, his eyes softening. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night sky. The world was still talking about what had happened. Commentators debated, politicians spoke, and social media buzzed. But for Elijah, it was never about attention. It was about reminding people that respect must live in the heart, not just in the law. Across town, Bradley sat alone in his living room. His badge lay on the table beside him. He replayed Elijah's words in his mind again and again. Your choice will decide what kind of officer you truly are. He realized it wasn't just about one mistake. It was about how he would live from this moment forward. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, I'll be better. I have to be. The story was far from over. The next few days would bring bigger consequences, public responses, and difficult lessons. But for the first time, both men, one who carried authority and one who carried humility, were connected by something larger than the event itself. It was the beginning of a change that would reach beyond one station, one city, and one misunderstanding. It would remind an entire nation that sometimes the most powerful message comes not from anger or punishment, but from calm truth spoken at the right time by the right person. The next few days after the meeting were filled with noise everywhere, news, social media, and conversations in coffee shops all across America. Everyone was talking about the same thing, the story of the police officer who handcuffed the director of the Secret Service outside the White House. The video had reached millions of people, and every network had its own version of the event. But what stayed the same in all of them was the calm face of Elijah Grant and the angry voice of Officer Bradley shouting in the background. People were shocked, confused, and upset. Some couldn't believe how a man so powerful could be treated that way, while others saw it as a mirror of what many had experienced before. Outside the D.C. police station, small crowds began to gather every day. They held signs that said things like, "Respect is for everyone," and "Justice with dignity." The public wanted answers. Inside the police department, things were tense. Officers spoke in low voices, nervous about what would happen next. Some of them felt sorry for Bradley, but most understood that he had gone too far. Even the chief of police looked tired from the endless calls from the mayor's office and the media. Bradley had been suspended while the review continued. He no longer wore his uniform. Every morning, he came to the station in plain clothes for interviews and paperwork. He tried to stay calm, but the whispers around him were impossible to ignore. Every time he passed by someone, conversation stopped. He could feel eyes following him at home. His wife, Claire, tried to comfort him. "You didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said gently. "You made a mistake. Maybe people will see that." Bradley sat at the table with his hands clasped. "I didn't just make a mistake, Claire," he said softly. "I judged a man before I even knew him. I didn't look at who he was. I just looked at what I thought he was." His wife placed her hand over his. "Then prove you've learned from it," she said kindly. "Don't hide from it." The next day, Bradley was called to appear before the department's Ethics Review Board. The meeting room was large and quiet, with 5 officers sitting behind a long table. A camera recorded everything for official records. Bradley sat in front of them, nervous but ready to face what was coming. One of the board members, a woman with a calm but firm voice, began the questioning. "Officer Bradley, you've served for 12 years. In that time, you've received both praise and complaints. What do you think went wrong that day?" Bradley took a deep breath. "I didn't stop to think," he admitted. "I saw a man near the White House, and instead of asking questions, I made assumptions. I thought I was being careful, but I was being unfair. I didn't see a person, I saw a problem." Another member leaned forward. "Do you understand the impact your actions have had on the department and the community?" "Yes," Bradley said, his voice low. "I've seen the videos. I've seen people lose faith in us. I know I can't change what happened, but I wish I could show them that one mistake doesn't have to define every officer." There was a long silence before the chairperson spoke. "Thank you, Officer Bradley. You'll be informed of the board's decision soon." When he left the room, his steps were slow. Outside, the sun was shining, but it felt distant. The moment he stepped out of the building, reporters rushed forward, calling his name, asking questions. "Do you regret what you did?" One shouted. "Have you apologized personally?" Another asked. Bradley didn't answer. He just kept walking. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed, and people shouted, but all he heard was the sound of his own heartbeat. Across town, Elijah sat in his office at the Secret Service headquarters. On his desk were folders, reports, and a tablet showing news updates. His assistant, Maria, stepped in. "Sir," she said softly, "the police department is holding a press conference tomorrow. They'll issue an official apology." Elijah nodded. "That's good," he said. "It's time to move forward." Maria hesitated. "There's one more thing," she said carefully. "They're asking if you'll attend. It might mean a lot to the public if they see you there." Elijah looked thoughtful for a moment, then smiled faintly. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." The next morning, the press conference took place on the steps of the D.C. Police Headquarters. Reporters, cameras, and citizens filled the space. Bradley stood to one side, looking pale and nervous. The chief of police stepped up to the podium first. "Today," he began, "we acknowledge a serious mistake made by one of our officers, an incident that does not reflect the values we stand for. We are deeply sorry for what happened to Director Elijah Grant." Then he stepped aside and nodded toward Elijah. The crowd went quiet as Elijah approached the microphone. His calm voice carried easily. "I appreciate the apology," he began. "But this isn't about one person or one department. It's about how we see each other every day. We must look beyond appearance, beyond judgment, and start seeing people as human beings." There was silence, then a wave of applause. Reporters scribbled notes quickly. Elijah looked toward Bradley, who stood a few steps away. Their eyes met briefly. Elijah gave him a small nod of approval, but of understanding. After the event, Elijah began walking toward his car, but Bradley approached him carefully. "Sir," he said quietly, I just wanted to say, thank you for how you handled all this. You could have ruined my life completely, but you didn't." Elijah looked at him kindly. "Bradley," he said softly, "you ruined your own moment, not your life. You can still make it right. Learn from it. Teach others. Change how you see." Bradley nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "I will, sir. I promise." Elijah smiled faintly. "Then it's worth it." That evening, TV stations showed clips from the conference. People across the country watched Elijah's calm speech. Many were inspired by his grace, while others began talking more openly about fairness, respect, and change. The event became more than just a headline. It became a lesson at the White House. Even the president commented on the situation during a meeting. "We need more leaders like Director Grant," he said. "Not just in offices, but in hearts." Meanwhile, Bradley started attending community meetings. He spoke to groups about what had happened, not to defend himself, but to help others understand. He told young officers, "I made a mistake that changed me. Don't repeat it. Ask questions before you judge. Listen before you act." Some people still criticized him, but others appreciated his honesty. Slowly, he began to rebuild his reputation, not through pride, but through humility. Elijah, too, continued his work quietly, protecting the nation with the same calm focus he had shown that day. Sometimes he thought about the moment outside the gate, the handcuffs, the misunderstanding, the crowd watching, and he would sigh softly. Not in anger, but in hope, because he knew that one moment of unfairness had led to many moments of reflection. And in a way, that was progress. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Elijah's office. It was from Bradley. Inside, it said, "Sir, I'm still learning from that day. I've joined a training program to help new officers understand respect and bias. Your words changed me more than any punishment could. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Elijah read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his drawer. He smiled faintly. "That's how change begins," he whispered outside. The sun set over Washington, turning the sky gold and soft pink. The story that had started with misunderstanding was ending with something better: awareness, humility, and hope. And though many would forget the details with time, the lesson would stay alive. True respect doesn't come from power, rank, or title. It comes from how one human being chooses to treat another, even when no one is watching. Months passed after the incident outside the White House. Washington, D.C. had returned to its normal rhythm: tourists by the gates, reporters in their usual spots, and officers on their daily patrols. But something had changed quietly beneath the surface. The story of Elijah Grant and Officer Bradley had left a lasting mark on people's hearts. It had become a reminder, not just about one mistake, but about how people should treat each other with fairness, patience, and respect. Elijah continued his work at the Secret Service. He was respected not only for his leadership, but for his calm strength. Many of his colleagues admired the way he handled the whole situation without anger or revenge. They often said he turned humiliation into hope. Yet, Elijah never let pride take over. He believed real leadership wasn't about how loud a person could be. It was about how steady they stayed when life tested them. One cold morning, Elijah arrived at the White House early. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky a soft orange. He stood near the same gate where everything had happened months ago. The memory was still clear: the officer's harsh words, the confusion, the flashing phones. But now, the place felt peaceful. A young Secret Service trainee named Jackson stood beside him. "Sir," he said quietly, "I've watched that video of what happened to you. It must have been hard to stay calm." Elijah smiled faintly. "It wasn't easy," he said. "But anger never fixes anything. When people lose control, the truth gets lost too. Jackson nodded, impressed. You handled it better than anyone else would have. Elijah looked at the gates again and said softly, maybe, but I didn't do it to look strong. I did it because one man losing his temper doesn't mean I should lose my peace. Later that day, Elijah was invited to speak at a national leadership event. The theme was integrity and humanity in public service. The hall was full. Officers, students, teachers, and citizens came to listen. When Elijah walked onto the stage, the crowd rose to their feet in applause. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. Months ago, he began, I found myself in a situation that tested my patience and dignity. I was judged before I was known. But that day taught me something powerful. Silence can sometimes speak louder than anger. And forgiveness, even when it's hard, can open hearts faster than punishment ever will. The crowd listened closely. His words were simple but carried weight. We can't control how others see us, he continued, but we can control how we respond. That is where our strength truly lives. When the event ended, many people came up to him, thanking him for his wisdom. Some even said his story had changed the way they looked at others. A teacher told him, I shared your story with my students. It taught them what respect really means. That evening, as Elijah left the building, a familiar voice called from behind him. Mr. Grant. He turned to see Officer Bradley walking toward him. He looked different, now no longer proud or defensive. His face was humble, his steps careful. He carried an envelope in his hand. Bradley. Elijah greeted him warmly. It's good to see you. Bradley nodded nervously. I didn't want to bother you, sir. I just wanted to give you this. He handed over the envelope. Inside was a certificate. It read, Community Award for promoting fairness and respect in law enforcement presented to Officer Bradley. Elijah looked up, surprised. Bradley smiled shyly. They started a training program at the department on respect and communication. I volunteered to help teach it. I use your story as an example. It's helping young officers think differently. Elijah's eyes softened. That's good, he said. You turned your mistake into something meaningful. That takes courage. Bradley lowered his eyes. I owe that to you, sir. You showed me grace when you didn't have to. I'll never forget that. Elijah put a hand on his shoulder. Then keep doing the right thing. One small change can ripple further than you think. They spoke for a while longer before parting ways. As Bradley walked away, he felt lighter than he had in months. He wasn't trying to erase the past anymore. He was building something better because of it. A week later, the White House hosted a quiet gathering to honor public servants who had made a difference through empathy and understanding. Elijah was among the guests. During the ceremony, the president himself spoke. Director Grant, he said from the podium, you reminded this nation that true strength isn't in power, it's in restraint. You turned injustice into inspiration. For that, we thank you. The applause was long and warm. Elijah nodded humbly, not smiling for the praise, but grateful that the lesson had reached so many hearts. After the ceremony, as night fell over Washington, Elijah took a slow walk past the reflecting pool. The water was still, showing the soft glow of city lights. He thought about how one moment, an unfair, painful moment, had grown into something far greater. People were talking, learning, and changing. He stopped near a bench where an old man was feeding birds. The man looked up and said, You're Elijah Grant, aren't you? Elijah smiled politely. Yes, sir. The old man nodded. I saw what happened on the news months ago. I was angry then. But when I saw how calm you stayed, I realized something. I need to be calmer too. You made me think before I judge people. Elijah's heart warmed. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more to me than you know. The man chuckled. Keep doing what you do, son. The world needs more people who lead with peace. Elijah continued his walk, the sound of the man's words staying with him. In that moment, he realized that the real victory wasn't about clearing his name. It was about touching lives. Meanwhile, Officer Bradley kept his promise. Every week, he visited schools and community centers, talking to young people about fairness, empathy, and patience. Sometimes, he started his talk by saying, "Once, I made a mistake that nearly ended my career. But someone I wronged showed me forgiveness. That forgiveness saved me." His story inspired others, too, officers, citizens, and students who listened quietly and learned. Months turned into a year. The scandal had faded from the headlines, but the lessons remained alive. Police departments across the country began including cultural respect sessions in their training. And every time someone mentioned where the idea began, Elijah's name came up, not as a victim, but as a teacher. One evening, Elijah visited a community event where Bradley was speaking. He stood quietly at the back of the room, watching as the officer shared his story with confidence and honesty. Bradley didn't notice him at first, but when the talk ended, their eyes met across the crowd. Bradley smiled, a small, sincere smile that spoke more than words could. Elijah nodded back, proud not of the applause, but of the change that had grown from one painful moment. When he stepped outside, the night air was cool, and the city lights shone bright against the dark sky. He looked up for a moment and whispered to himself, "Maybe that's what we're all here for, to learn, to grow, and to lift others higher than before." As he walked toward his car, a group of young recruits saluted him respectfully. "Good evening, Director Grant," one of them said. Elijah smiled kindly. "Good evening," he replied. "Remember, your duty isn't just to protect people. It's to understand them." And with that, he drove away into the quiet night, leaving behind not just a story, but a legacy, a living reminder that one act of grace can change a heart. And one changed heart can begin to heal the world. The man who once stood accused now stood admired. The officer who once judged now taught understanding. And the city that once divided in outrage now whispered a new truth. Real power is not in the hands that strike, but in the heart that forgives.